there was an interview going out with Rachel Reeves and Nick Robinson during, I think it was this week, where they were talking about how, her mum used to like count up all the receipts and make sure everything lined up, the guy who definitely knows that's not how a government's finances work sort of just nodded along and was like, yes, that's no wonder you're so fiscally responsible, Rachel. So why is that not correct, basically?
I roll my eyes whenever those comparisons are made. Obviously, she's trying to kind of allude to a sense of responsibility that people have in their households, right? And in a sense, there's nothing wrong with claiming that you're responsible and good at household finances. The issue comes, of course, when you compare those against the government's. The government, is very different to a household in terms of finances, because in a nutshell, the government issues the currency, whereas households don't issue the currency, they use the currency. So in order for households to spend their income, spend money, they first have to get an income, either through a job or they have to borrow the funds. And if they don't do these things before they spend, then the funds are simply not available for them to use. So either obtaining an income or borrowing is a prerequisite for them to spend. The government, on the other hand, is the other way around. The government cannot collect income for itself through taxation unless it has spent money into existence first. So not only there is no prerequisite for the government to obtain an income or borrow, in inverted commas, and I'll come back to that, because borrow for the government doesn't even mean the same thing that it does for a household. But there is no prerequisite to obtain funds before it can actually spend into the economy. So because the government is, of course, the source of the currency, and if the government doesn't spend currency, then there wouldn't be any currency in the system in the first place. So it's quite frustrating for me to see politicians advocating a kind of responsibility in fiscal spending, which is akin to household finances, and kind of make a parallel like Rachel Reeves did of being responsible in terms of matching, your income and borrowing to your spending, as a household would have to do, as being the responsible thing to do in government, because it's actually very, very irresponsible. It's probably the most irresponsible thing you can do in terms of fiscal spending. Unfortunately, is a parallel that resonates with people, of course, because they experience it in their lives, and they don't. They haven't really been told that things can work in a different way. So it's widely accepted. If you see our media, if you see TV shows, movies, from the moment you're born, and now I have a 1-year-old starting to see cartoons, and I see how prevailing these myths are about the government being financially constrained in the same way that a household is. Now, all that I've said is, of course, is in relation to a government that issues its own currency, such as the UK or the US, Japan, Australia, and as well as doesn't hold a significant amount of foreign denominated debt, or is not, which is to say, is not dependent on a foreign currency for its kind of day-to-day management. The UK has very little foreign denominated debt. For those governments, they are not financially constrained in their own currency. Of course, the government doesn't issue, a foreign currency. So it becomes a little bit different if a government doesn't issue its own currency, like the countries in the Eurozone or Puerto Rico, for example. And that's different. But in the case of the big economies, at least, then we can say that this is true.
Mm. What cartoons are you showing your 1-year-old that are discussing like fiscal responsibility by a government?
Well, I try to be honest. I try to minimize the screen time, and I think a lot of parents will agree with me.
Mm,
It's not as easy as I thought it would be to minimize screen time, but I do my best.
mm.
But yeah, I think even Peppa Pig has an episode on, finance.
Really? Wow. Okay.
It's very subtle. You know what? It's
Yeah.
very it's little things here and there.
Mm.
But yeah, you once you pick it up, you notice it in all the movies, in everything, basically. Sorry.
That's funny. No, so you said there that trying to treat a government's finances like a household's is like the most irresponsible thing that a chancellor could do. Like, why is that irresponsible?
Uh, because the objectives of a household and the objectives of the government are very different. A household is trying to obtain uh, services to goods and services in order to feed or to provide for its inhabitants, and it first has to, as I said, is financially constrained, so it has to borrow or obtain an income in order to obtain those things. And if it borrows too much, then that um, debt can become crippling, and then it can spiral into bankruptcy. And so the responsible thing to do is to always have as a first consideration your income and your borrowing, and then see from there what can you afford to buy, right?
Mhm.
The problem is that with the government is the other way around. The source of money is the government. So you and I would not be able to pay taxes unless money had been spent into existence first. That money has to come from somewhere before you and I can pay taxes. Um, uh, of course, none of us has a money printing machine at home, unless you want to tell me something.
No,
but
I wouldn't admit to it.
but the you know so the government needs to first make sure that if it's going to tax people, that people can access the currency they need in order to pay that tax. So this can be quite confusing to people because they've always understood taxation as the means by which the government raises funds. Uh, Taxation is the means by which the government acquires non-financial resources. That is all it's trying to do. The imposition of a tax is not because the government wants the currency per se. It's because they want our citizens to carry out real kind of work activities that to obtain that currency before they can pay it. So the value to the government is the work that we're doing to provide the currency, and where so we said the currency derives value from the taxation, because the government is saying you owe me, I don't know, for the sake of argument, let's say £100 a month in tax, and I'm then going to spend £200 into existence, and I'm going to pay you £200 to build a road. And then at the end of the month, you have £200. You pay the government £200 in taxation, and you may retain the remainder for yourself. That is the deficit. So the government deficit is enabling both the paying of the tax, but also is enabling the private sector to save some money for a rainy day. And so if you do the opposite, if you try to reduce the deficit, or you try to kind of forcefully reduce the debt. The debt is simply, for the sake of a definition, it's just a sum of all previously accumulated historical deficits that the government has ever had.
Mm-hmm.
So if the government sees that as a bad thing and says, no, we need to reduce that, then what it needs to do is run a surplus, which means that one month it might say, okay, I'm going to charge you £100 of tax at the end of the month. But this time I'm only going to spend £50 for you to, I don't know, build me half a road. So you do that, you get your £50. And of course, when it comes to paying the tax, you need to go into debt, or you need to use up savings that you've got in order to be able to pay the taxation that you owe the government. So in that case, the government has a surplus. So I think the key to understand is that whatever the government does in terms of the fiscal balance, it's a mirror image on the private sector. So if the government is running a deficit, the private sector, then what we call the non-government sector, for the sake of accuracy, has a surplus. And if the government is running a surplus, then the non-government sector has a deficit. So if a government runs surpluses causing a non-government deficit for a substantial amount of time, you can eventually lead to recession because as I said, the non-government sector doesn't issue currency. Eventually, that private debt becomes crippling, and it's not sustainable, and you can lead to financial crisis and all sorts of things, and to recession above all.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.